Hey everybody, and welcome back to 2BeLikeChrist. This is our second video in our Apologetics series. So we're just launching into this. We want to set a foundation before we move on to Christian evidences, apologetics, historicity of the Bible. So one thing that we need to learn how to do is to learn how to think. And we discussed in the last video that one of the best ways to do that is to learn how not to think. All the bad arguments that people use and how we can avoid those. So we are using Ali al-Musawi's book as kind of an outline, and I've got a link in the description below. It's like $6 on Amazon if you want a copy, and it's a great book for the most part. And we are on argument number 2. This is one that you don't want to use, and it's known as the Straw Man Fallacy. So you've probably heard about straw men before. Maybe you watched a debate. Every once in a while you hear it thrown around in casual conversation. You may have an idea of what it is, you may not. So let me give you the definition that Ali uses in his book. He says, to put up a straw man is to intentionally caricature a person's argument with the aim of attacking the caricature rather than the actual argument. Misrepresenting, misquoting, misconstruing, and oversimplifying an opponent's position are all means by which one can commit this fallacy. So you may be able to guess where that name comes from, straw man. It comes from boxing or fighting, where a fighter, instead of fighting his real opponent, would actually create a dummy opponent made out of straw who looks like him but obviously can't fight back. And so it gives that boxer an easy knockdown, an easy emotional win, scores him some points with the audience. And you see how that parallels into logic and into debate. And that is that it's much easier to knock down a caricature or a laughable version of your opponent's argument rather than breaking down the tenets constructively of an accurately communicated position contrary to your own. A caricature, if you don't know, is basically taking a picture of somebody and then making a ridiculous copy of that with exaggerated features and overemphasized funny parts. I'll throw up a few pictures of my good friends Putin and Kim right here for you to see. And unfortunately, I think this straw man fallacy has really become a plague on our culture in almost any discussion across the board, no matter what the topic or subject, but especially in apologetics and Christian evidences. Let me give you a few examples that really might hit home as far as those who are looking at this from a religious or an apologetic perspective. So this first example might be one that you would hear between opposing theologies, namely between amillennialism and premillennialism. Amillennialists believe, basically, this is a generalization, but they basically believe that the 1,000-year reign of Christ in the book of Revelation is a symbolic 1,000 years, whereas a premillennialist typically believes that it is a physical, real 1,000-year reign of Jesus on the earth. So I've heard many times from the amillennial perspective that premillennialists believe that Jesus has to return to physically reign for 1,000 years because Jesus failed to establish the kingdom the first time he was here. The Jews stopped him. They killed him. That wasn't part of his plan, and so he has to come back to establish the kingdom. This is used by many amillennialists as an easy knockdown argument because obviously anyone who believes in the sovereignty of God sees that there's a big problem there. So they say, aha, look, that's how we know premillennialism is wrong. Well, the problem with that is that the more that I've studied premillennialism, I've known people who are premillennialists, I've never heard a premillennialist affirm that position. In fact, every premillennialist that I've read, and granted, yes, there might be some odd ones out there who would affirm that, but everyone that I've ever read affirms the sovereignty of God and absolutely would deny the idea that Christ failed the first time and that's why he has to come back. They would argue for the physical 1,000 years very differently. So why is it so common that amillennialists use that argument? Well, because it's an easy knockdown. It's an easy emotional win for people who are on that side. But really, it's not a logically sound argument. It's a straw man. And again, this is not any reflection on my eschatological views. Just want to say it one more time. Atheists also do this to theists when they're trying to bash on religion. Oftentimes you'll hear an atheist take a sampling of all of the worst things that have happened throughout history, and they'll compile that body of terrible things, and they'll say, look, this is the outcome, this is what Christianity, this is what religion gets you in the end. People like Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins is terrible at doing this. He's terrible at using straw men as a whole, but anyway, So many atheists employ this type of an argument, and it's fallacious. It's a terrible oversimplification. Number one, because they just tend to forget about all the good things that have been done in the name of religion. It's also a caricature and an oversimplification of religion, specifically Christianity. These people who go out and do morally abhorrent things in the name of Christianity are always in complete opposition and have disregarded the moral principles and teaching of the founder of Christianity. But they ignore that and they oversimplify. Why? Because it scores points with their audience, right? And it's much easier than going into the scriptures and looking at the principles of the new covenant and examining those on an individual level to see, does Christianity really breed and engender this abhorrent moral outcome, or is it quite the opposite? This can also happen between evolutionists and creationists and evolutionists. And I'll get on my own side here. As someone who doesn't ascribe to the evolutionary theory, I can see how sometimes people on my side set up straw men against the evolutionary theory. For example, you often hear people say, well, one day there was a monkey and then evolution teaches that the next day there was a man, and that's ridiculous. And even being on the creationist side, I can see how that's an obvious straw man because I've read enough evolutionary theory and people who believe in the evolutionary theory to understand that that is a massive oversimplification of what somebody who accurately and intricately understood the evolutionary theory would argue for when talking about the evolution between an ape or a monkey and a human. If you want a political example, just look at presidential debates. They aren't set up in a way that engenders constructive conversation of the issues, but rather it's to score points with an audience. And so if you want to see a plethora of straw men set up and knocked down in a matter of an hour's time, go watch a presidential debate. And with this being so epidemic in our culture, I really want to warn against this because when you really look at it, what you'll understand is that this doesn't do any good for anybody. Sure, it may give you an emotional high of having won against an opponent, but it doesn't get us any closer to the truth when we're constantly misrepresenting each other. Thinking in these ways really is harmful to people rather than helping anybody. Let's say that I am arguing for position and I set up a straw man in order to do that. You think about it, the people who already believe like me, it's not going to benefit them in any way because they're not going to be challenged with a constructive and accurate picture of an opponent's argument in which to compare and contrast what they believe. So there's no benefit there. I'll just compound what they already think that they know and do it by using a fallacious argument. What about somebody who doesn't believe like I believe? Well, they're going to look at my argument and say, well, this person can't even accurately represent what I believe, and so what could I possibly learn from him? Good thinking, good debate, good discussion takes time, and I think that's probably a lot of the reason why it doesn't happen as much as it should today. You think about how many straw men are used on platforms like social media, where content is meant to be consumed very quickly, very quick interactions. A lot of times people say, well, a straw man argument is exactly what I need in this situation because this is not a platform in which we are going to dedicate a lot of time or energy or space to really consider the issues, but it's a place where I just am looking for a quick hit or a quick win in order to knock somebody down a peg. What we really need to do, I actually heard a preacher say the other day, and it's actually in a book, Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft, I believe is his name. I'll link it down below as well. And he writes this: one of the rules of medieval debate was designed to block straw man arguments. You must first state your opponent's idea in your own words to be sure that you understand the idea instead of just parroting the words to his satisfaction before you go on to refute it. How much better would our lives be? How much more constructive would our discussions be if we applied this kind of principle? You had both parties come into a room, sit down with a proper amount of time, communicate their ideas to one another to the point and with the clarity of the individual who's opposing that idea being able to communicate it back to the person who's affirming it to his satisfaction. Right? So there's a full understanding of what the other one is arguing for and against, and how many fewer straw man arguments would be set up. And I think in the end, we would actually save time because the conversation would be so constructive that it wouldn't just drone on in endless nonsense. So 3 ways that we really need to consider this as we move forward with our apologetic study. And first of all is that we need to make sure that we are not setting up straw men, misrepresenting, caricaturing, other people's arguments, because as we discussed, that's not doing anyone any good. And when we understand this principle, we can also make sure that other people are not making straw man arguments about the positions that we support, and that we can call that out and correct it when it happens. And then third and finally, having an understanding of this will protect us from accidentally getting caught up defending an opponent's straw man argument of our own argument, right? That is a sure way to get caught out and get yourself in trouble in any debate, is to find yourself defending a straw man that someone else has created of your own argument. So far we've looked at two bad arguments, the argument from consequences and the straw man fallacy, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I've really enjoyed this study. I hope you're enjoying it too. Let me know any constructive criticism that you may have to make this content more understandable, more relatable. I'd love to know and to incorporate that, because truthfully, I've never done a formal apologetics study by myself in any kind of really structured way. And so any feedback would be great. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that. We will continue to go through the remainder of Ali's book. And again, if you want a copy, I'll put it in a link down below. And share this content with anyone who it may be helpful for. Give it a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.